Today I'm going to show you how I make my patchwork journal covers. I start with a cracker or cookie box, and I take some double-sided tape. I just use the Walmart brand, and I take 2 sheets of copy paper and I overlap them by about 1/2 inch and I tape them together. I think it's easiest to adhere the pieces of fabric to the paper and then glue that onto the box. It also gives another layer of stability and covers up the image on the front of the box. The first thing you need to do is trace around it so you'll know where your borders are. When you lay the fabric down, you will go over the border a little bit, anywhere from a 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch. But I do the same thing on the other side too, and I hold it up to the light to make sure I have it lined up right. And the reason we do the other side as well is because when I'm all done, I like to run just a straight stitch with the sewing machine all the way around just to give it a finished look. Then I want to mark where the spine will be, so I just run a pencil mark all the way to the ends of the pages, because you want to put it's easier if you put one single fabric piece on the spine. I just decide where I want all of my pieces of fabric to go. You can glue as you go along, or you can try to place all of them, rearranging and stuff like that, and then add glue after you have everything like you want it. It really just is your personal preference. I like to get a variety of shapes. I do rectangles, I do long narrow strips, I do squares, and then right here you'll see some quilting hexagons that I bought at a thrift store. I add 1 or 2 of those just for interest. Your pieces for your patchwork can be as large or as small as you wish them to be. If you don't like to do a lot of sewing or don't want it to take a lot of time, you can just use 5 or 6 large pieces. You also don't have to just use regular fabric or quilting fabric. You can use the same technique by using doilies or napkins or handkerchiefs. Those are also very, very pretty if you do them in a patchwork style. So I'm making a green themed journal. That's why all of the fabric is green or mint or celery green. And so I end up taking a couple of these out just because I think once you put them next to some of the other greens, they ended up looking blue. But it's best to get more than you need when you start out. And then of course you'll end up with scraps that are left over. But those can be used inside the journal as decorations, or just toss them into your scrap basket if you have one. So here I am just laying everything down. As you can see, I'm overlapping the edge by about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit more, just because that part will wrap around your box when you end up gluing down this to your box and then wrapping the edges down. You'll see what I mean in a moment. You don't want to lay the fabric right up to the line or you'll see a raw edge. You can gently overlap them. You can overlap them a great deal, however you'd like to. It's just best to overlap them at least a little bit, in case your sewing is a little bit off, as mine always is. You give yourself some wiggle room and you won't end up with some of the white paper showing through. So now I'm just gluing all of the pieces down, just enough to tack them down so that when I take it over to the sewing machine, and you will have to bend this paper up quite a bit to get it to rotate and go underneath your sewing machine arm. You want to make sure you put enough glue that things won't go flying off, but not so much that you're not able to pull and tug at the material if it wants to start to pucker. And you'll see what I mean when you start sewing. Sometimes as you go along, especially on the long narrow pieces like the spine, the fabric will want to pucker if you don't sort of keep it taut as you sew. So you just want to make sure that you tack them down well enough so that you can manipulate it like you need to. So here I'm just ripping a piece for the spine. I want to make sure that it covers the spine and goes over onto the front and the back of the book by about 1/2 inch, just like you would when you're covering the spine for a little golden book. You don't want there to be, you don't want the fabric to butt right up to the edge of where the book will bend. And I chose a thicker duck cloth for this part, so when you sew your signatures in, it will be more substantial. So I'm using a zigzag stitch. I think I'm using a height of 4 and a spacing of 1.5. And I just generally go, I don't have any sort of pattern or routine. I just kind of go, where it looks like I need to go next. I try not to backtrack unless I'm making a stitch. You know how you go a little bit on a back stitch to secure the edge, but I don't, when I get to the end of a row like that, I do cut it and start over. It is somewhat of a time consuming activity. In fact, patchwork covers are probably the most time and labor intensive covers that you can make for junk journals. At least fabric ones. I've not tried some of the more elaborate, multi-layers of painted hard covers that people do. I'm sure those do take a long time also, but patchwork fabric covers are a bit of a commitment. So here I'm just showing you that I flipped it over and I'm going in about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to run a straight stitch all the way around, and here's what it looks like completed. Now I am setting my box down, face down, so that the print is touching the back of the white paper, making sure I'm lining it up exactly right to the lines that I drew earlier. I'm using a Fabri-Tac. You can use any glue of choice. I like Fabri-Tac the best for this application just because it dries faster. The thing I dislike about it is to get it to spread evenly, I use my finger, and I just don't like how toxic it seems to be, but I wash my hands right after this step every time I do this. And you just want to make sure that you press it down really well with your hand or a paper towel like I'm doing here, just to make sure every single part is adhered to that paper. Then I do the spine next. I rotated the whole thing. I don't know if you saw that. I'm a right-handed person, so I usually work right to left. And now I'm putting the glue on the last side, which I think is going to be the back of the book. And I let this dry for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then I come back and I trim triangles. I leave about 1/8 of an inch at the end of each corner. This will just help you fold over the edges better. You want to make sure you have about 1 inch of paper to pull over onto the other side. And I got my Fabri-Tac again, and I start with the long, I call them the long ends. They're really the short ends, but they're the book edges that open up to the book, where the page edges are. And the tabs and the closure and all that. And so you'll have some fabric that you also need to glue down, just because the fabric is not going to be all the way stuck to the edge or sewn. So you just methodically add a little more glue here and there, press down, Sort of a tedious process, but you just go a little bit at a time. With this book, I realized I probably should have brought a little more fabric over. I had a pretty hard time getting these tiny little strips of fabric to stick down. I was able to do so, but it was still difficult. If you don't want the inside papers that you glue down to butt almost to the edge of your book, then definitely extend your fabric in a little more so you have a little more fabric showing when your book is open. The long edges are a lot harder to get down without bubbles and bulges and ripples and folds. You just really have to take your time. Get it the best that you can. It's not going to be perfect. This is a junk journal, so give yourself grace and be sure you have ventilation when you're using Fabri-Tac glue for this long as well, or you'll get quite a massive headache. Usually the corners turn out pretty well doing it with this method, but if there's any little fray bits showing or you don't like the way the corners have folded, these books also are really good candidates for the little metal book corners that you can glue and or hammer on. If that is the look that you would like, then by all means add those to your corners when you are done. So here I just have a strip of gingham that I've sewn a little zigzag bit on either side down just to prevent any more fraying, and I've marked where the center of it is. And I'm going to go ahead and start cutting my end papers. These are actually cardstock. I prefer to use cardstock on the inside because it's more substantial. It gives more bulk to the book. So now I am going to just make sure everything is measured correctly. It seems to be. So it's time to glue down the sash tie. And you can use ribbon for this. You can use lace, seam binding. I just decided to go with a wide strip of fabric for these. Just be sure that you do this step before you get to the end papers. With these also, I just use Fabri-Tac. Be sure you get all the way up to the edge and in each corner, because those are the parts that are going to want to pull away because they're adhering to fabric that has been folded, and so it's a little more of a challenge to get them to stick down. Just be patient, go a little bit at a time, and it'll be just fine. I hate to cover this beautiful paper up. I love the back side as well. That's the bad part about double-sided scrapbook paper. This is some that Jan was sweet to send me, and I just loved the stripes, so I decided the little offcut that I did cut off, I will use it somewhere else for sure. So this part, you don't need any cardstock that looks pretty. Just glue down a strip of cardstock that is just shy of the width of the spine. That's for more bolstering. And then I cut a strip of fabric that will bridge that gap by about 1/4 to 1/2 inch on either side. And I cut it the exact height of the book, and I'm going to glue this down with Fabri-Tac. If you wanted to do a hidden spine, you would glue that piece right there to the fabric, and then after you're done sewing your signatures, you would glue the signatures in that way. but I decided not to do a hidden spine. I was having trouble with my glue. I decided to use tacky glue for this, just because I think it's easier to spread and get this part laying right and looking nice if I use tacky glue for this application. So I did that on this part. I use a credit card to make sure that the fabric is going to go into the crease when the book is folded. And here you go. Beautiful and ready to be filled with all of your favorite papers. So fun. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.